This clip is brought to you by SaveWithConrad.com.
Let's talk about the July 1st Observer. Meltzer would report that WCW was out looking for their mystery man for the third man in the NWO, and everyone agreed that Bret would be the best guy for the spot. The WCW hotline even teased it, but supposedly Bret turned down every offer. Lots has been made about this on my podcast with Eric about who was or wasn't going to be the third man. When you guys see this NWO storyline developing over May and June and into early July, were you nervous given your contractual status with Bret that, hey, do we have him locked up? I only bring this up because of the Lex Luger situation where he debuted on the first Nitro. Do you remember you and Vince ever scratching your head and wondering, do we have something to worry about with Bret?
Well, sure. Anytime you get a star whose contract is the exit, the end date of the contract is within eyesight, so to speak, within arm's reach. You want to make sure that you have some leverage and some control over the situation. You know, on top guys, when I sign top guys, if they signed a 3-year deal, generally speaking, not all the time, but generally speaking, we were talking renewal if we wanted to renew or extend or better deal, whatever. And a lot of guys that had low side guarantees that had out earned it and had proven themselves to be more valuable than we had perceived originally. Contracts were tore up and new contracts were issued before the existing contract expired. So that was a theory that I had because I didn't want to get caught with this Luger stuff. Even though Luger going to WCW didn't kill us, and he was their issue to deal with, but we wanted to make sure that we didn't get caught with our pants down, as so to speak, on that deal. So yeah, we talked about it, and I just never thought at the end of the day, if Bret was being paid fairly in his mind, and he was earning big money, which he was, that he would stay because it was WWE was his home base. That was always his goal, to get to WWF and become a star and become the main guy. So I thought that sentimentally, and shame on me because that's my naivete. It's when people say it's not about the money, bullshit, Conrad. It's all about the money.
The Ultimate Warrior is somebody who would probably agree with that. And you guys are having problems with him backstage. And on July 8th, the Observer would write, Bret Hart was called that morning and told that they were tired of Hellwig's constant demands and wanted him for emergency duty to work Detroit and Pittsburgh to make up for Warrior not being there. For whatever reason, Hart didn't come back. A call was then made to Sid Udy, who's been out of action for months, and he was brought back as a babyface replacement. What was Vince's reaction to Bret saying no here?
Well, obviously it wasn't good.
Right.
He should be more loyal. He owes me this and all those things. He probably would have, that was a matter of communication. Look, in hindsight, what you do if you're Vince, you get on a plane and you fly to Calgary.
That's exactly what he did on July 23rd.
So there you go. He tried, and he just couldn't close the deal. And anytime Vince McMahon can't close the deal, there's consternation.
July 23rd, Vince charters a plane. This is before the company has a jet, and he goes to Calgary to visit Bret. 2 weeks prior, at WCW's Bash at the Beach, Hulk Hogan turned heel and joined the NWO, and Vince gave Bret a contract and told him to name his price. Vince said allegedly, whatever you want. And during this conversation, Vince would tell Bret that Shawn and Undertaker were making $700,000 a year, but Bret didn't sign, but he does give Vince his word that he'll return in the fall. When Vince doesn't come back with a closed, signed, sealed, delivered contract, are you nervous? Is the old man trying to sell it to you? What do you remember about this?
No, I had encouraged Vince that, Bret's not a phone call guy. Too proud. All this character and integrity. You should, if the guy's been with you for over a decade, doing great work, night in and night out, in any environment you put him in, he deserves a face-to-face. So if you can, I thought that it would impress Bret that Vince made the effort to fly from Connecticut to Calgary to address him personally. And I thought that would probably close the deal. It didn't close the deal because Bret had his mind made up what he wanted to do. And here's the thing you said earlier. Here's what gives me some solace is that Bret gave Vince his word. And to me, Bret Hart's word was golden.
We would see Bret come back to finish these South African shots like he had promised before. September 8th, he's in South Africa getting a win over the Bulldog. Same thing on the 10th. That's Bret teaming up with Mark Marrow to beat Owen and the Bulldog. And then on the September 9th Observer, some details come out. Apparently when Hart and McMahon reached a verbal agreement for Hart to return after McMahon flew to Calgary to meet with Hart in the days following the Vancouver International Incident Show, the scenario the two agreed to was a match with Steve Austin in Survivor Series, followed by appearances at the December and January pay-per-views, and Hart would go back on the road full-time somewhere in January to build up for WrestleMania. The apparent sketchy plan would be that they would shoot an angle at the Royal Rumble to lead to the Bret and Shawn return match at next year's WrestleMania. It would make sense that a title switch would take place at that show for several reasons. First off, Hart made it clear he wouldn't return unless the belt was in the cards, and he was happy enough at having to put Shawn over last year. It's doubtful he'd agree to come back if it meant putting him over a second time. Second, Michaels had apparently made it clear that he would put Hart over in a title match, provided he was promised to get the belt back at a specific time in the future. Hart had told business friends he was offered substantially more money by WCW, but felt that going to that company would be a step down. In your opinion, do you believe there was a discussion? Because Bruce has always said, no, Vince didn't work like that. Do you believe that Bret was promised a title win over Shawn for the belt at WrestleMania 13?
I'm skeptical about that, but I think that what Vince did have the ability to do is say that may be a great idea, and we'll consider that. But committing to that, I find a little un-Vince-like. But in any event, I'm not buying that one.
Let's talk about something that is going to get us in a little bit of trouble here today. So we're going to stir it up here on Twitter. Bret said on September 25th, he goes to Los Angeles to do a guest appearance on The Simpsons. And Bret's lawyer, Barry Bloom, tells Bret that Eric Bischoff wants to meet with him. And Bret said they'd talk about it when he got to LA. When Bret lands and gets to his hotel, Eric is already on his way to his room. Eric asks him, allegedly, what's it going to take to bring you to WCW? And Bret supposedly said, I want the exact same contract as Hulk Hogan plus one penny. And Bischoff said, I can't do a deal, anything like that right now. And Bret said, that's fine. I'm not really looking to go anywhere. I'm happy where I'm at. And Eric said, come on, at least give me something I can go back to my people with. And Bret said, I'll think about coming to work for you guys for $3 million a year and a lighter schedule. And Eric said he'd take that back to the Turner people in Atlanta. And according to Bret, on September 27th, 1996, Bischoff offered him a contract for $2.8 million a year for 3 years to go to WCW. And Bret told him he'd think about it. Bret said Vince was hearing rumors that Bret had already signed, but on October 3rd, Bret called him and told him he wouldn't do anything until they talked first. Vince ended up calling him that weekend and asked Bret what the offer was. Bret told him it was $3 million for 3 years, working 180 dates. Vince told him he couldn't match that. And Bret said, I wasn't asking you to match it. Just give me the best offer you can. And Vince said Bret would never do, or WCW would never know what to do with a Bret Hart. And in hindsight, he was right. He said he needed a few days to think about it. And like Don Corleone, he would make him an offer he couldn't refuse. And then on October 9th, Vince flew back to Calgary to give Bret this offer in person. And during the meeting, Bret told Vince about the Wrestling with Shadows documentary, and Vince said he had no problem with getting Paul access to the matches in the backstage area. And in this meeting is where Vince offered Bret a 20-year contract for $10.5 million. It's $1.5 million a year for 3 years, and then $500,000 for the next 7 years as one of the senior advisors, and then $250,000 a year for 10 years to be on standby as the Babe Ruth of the company. And Vince allegedly tells him, quote, I'll never give you a reason to ever want to leave here. And Bret said WCW was offering almost the same amount of money, but for 3 years. But Bret just couldn't leave Vince. So he accepts the offer and they shake hands. And Meltzer would write a lot about this bidding war. But in recent years, Eric Bischoff has said, not true. I never made such an offer. And Meltzer got hot about it. And a lot of other people have argued that, no, it's true. I saw the contract. And Bischoff has said, produce the offer and I'll eat it. I will live stream me eating the paperwork because it never happened. What do you believe happened and now, and what did you believe happened back then with this WCW offer to Bret, and ultimately Vince having to make such a long offer to Bret?
Well, it was a very creative offer. Nothing like that offer had ever been made prior to, and I'm not so sure anything has been made since of that nature. You don't offer a pro wrestler a 20-year contract. It's not feasible in a lot of sense, physically, burnout, aging, all this other stuff. But as far as Bret getting a deal, getting that deal, first of all, not very many people knew what the deal was. Only a few of us. But I had no issues with it, because if Vince believed that was financially going to be feasible to do, then he would know that better than anybody else, what he could or couldn't do financially. But we were all happy that Bret. Bottom line is this, Conrad: those in the inner circle there at that time were happy that we were keeping Bret. You don't want to lose Bret. I don't think the Patriots wanted to lose Tom Brady, even though they make a big story of it now. Oh, it's better for the team. Bullshit. Come on. He's won 6 Super Bowls. He's a face of your franchise in New England, and now he's a Tampa Bay Buck. So we didn't want Bret to become a Tampa Bay Buck. A lot of us, because we knew what we had with him, and it was stuff that we could not replicate or replace.
Right. Well, I mean, you do land him, and supposedly when Meltzer gets word of the offer, it's nearly $4 million. Now, it's not all in cash. There are some other things that they're going to be offering, and some other opportunities, perhaps like movies and television and things like that. But it's a pretty major offer. Yep. And Meltzer would write, Hart, who apparently was WCW bound before meeting with McMahon, apparently changed his mind once, if not twice again, before supposedly making a final decision. And it was a secret from everyone in wrestling. Do you think this 20-year deal is something that Vince felt backed into a corner for and would have never offered, and just felt pressured to do so, and just way out of his comfort zone to offer such a lengthy contract?
Yeah, of course. He would not have broken the mold and created a new financial package and presentation if he thought that if WCW wasn't in the picture and offering massive money, it would not have motivated Vince to try to get in that game. So yeah, I'm sure he was uncomfortable with that situation. And, again, it was such a unique deal. There was no precedent for it, Conrad, to go back and say, well, we did that with so-and-so. No, we had never done it with anybody. I don't know if it had ever been done with anybody in the history of the wrestling business. Quite honestly, I don't think it probably had. So I think Vince felt a little bit pressured, and the WCW component was the catalyst for that.
Meltzer would write on the October 28th Observer, Bret Hart agreed to a 20-year contract with the World Wrestling Federation just prior to making the announcement of his returning on the live Monday Night Raw show from Fort Wayne, Indiana on October 21st. Hart, the subject of the biggest bidding war in the history of pro wrestling, turned down an offer from WCW in the live interview, acknowledged the offer, and praised WCW, but he only referred to that company as a rival company to the WWF, saying they treated him with honesty and integrity in the negotiations. And Hart had been asked over the weekend by the WWF to, in dramatic fashion, rip up the WCW contract on live TV as a retaliation for things like having Medusa throw the women's belt in the garbage can on Nitro, but Bret refused to do so. Do you remember you guys asking him to do that, to tear up the WCW deal?
Well, I was not involved in that conversation if it did happen. Would not be surprised if it weren't asked of Bret to counter what Medusa did. The one-upsmanship, that was the competitive nature of the WWE, WCW rivalry was getting hotter and hotter. It was finally realized that unlike the old WCW, the WCW under Bischoff was becoming a viable contender because Turner had loosened the purse strings, and they had seemingly, I know they didn't, but they had seemingly had this amazingly large talent budget. So it wouldn't surprise me if that was asked, Conrad, but to answer honestly, as I try to do on the show, I don't recall it, but if it comes to the fruition that it did happen, that would not surprise me whatsoever.
There's another thing that Meltzer writes about that just fascinates me. He says there's yet another interesting key to this story. One of the things Hart had complained in the past that could stand in the way of his going to WCW was the presence of Hulk Hogan. Yet apparently in the final negotiations, McMahon talked about both Hogan and Savage's WCW contracts coming due between now and the end of the year. He suggested it was possible, and even suggested it was more than possible, that one or both, and Hogan being the most likely, would end up in the WWF in 1997. One would think if McMahon had brought that up, that a promise that Hart would get his elusive win over Hogan and the idea that Hogan might be there could have worked as a positive in clinching the deal. This seems silly to me, but Dave is basically suggesting maybe Bret is still sore about the way everything happened with Hogan and Yokozuna at WrestleMania 9. And it's important to him to get that win over Hogan. And Bret did write a lot about that in his book. Do you think perhaps Vince sowed the seeds of doubt that, hey, maybe Hulk's coming back and maybe we can finally do that Bret Hogan match we never got to in 93?
Very possible. You know, I was not privy to those conversations one-on-one with Vince and Bret on that topic. But I'm telling you that if all that were true and there was a remote interest in Hogan renewing his relationship with McMahon, which made Hogan famous and rich, that he might consider it. If it was a remote possibility, it's certainly a nice leveraging chip, negotiating chip to throw into your formula. So I don't know that it happened, but if I had been in Vince's position and that situation was facing me, you're damn right I would have used it.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.